Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus Today. Tacitus Today, your pushback channel. And thank you for joining this audio, radio, no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast as you're driving along in your car, your truck, or put in those earbuds and listen to it on public transport. In this presentation, I'd like to talk about the wider issue of, race hustling, race grifting, particularly as it relates to allegations and the narrative around institutional racism. And they usually throw misogyny in there for good measure, but focusing really on the institutional, structural, as they call it, also racism. Does it actually exist? Now, there's quite a lot of interviews around, online interviews and interviews conducted by the mainstream media, and the mainstream media likes to push this narrative that this racism is everywhere and we have to stop it. And all Western governments, all the globalist controlled Western governments aggressively push this idea that we're surrounded by white supremacist Nazis and race hustling and all that. It's very much front and center of part of that. And we all know what it's for. It's to cow and shame and erode and undermine the confidence of the white population, so they can be kept in place while the globalist steamroller rides roughshod over the top of them. That's what it's all about. So, but anyway, let's have a look at this. So, I've seen in many of these interviews where the most outrageous and absurd claims are made. You know, did you know that 500 billion black people are murdered every day by Hitler? And the interviewer just nods along and yeah. There's no pushback or questioning or request for confirmation on some of these absurd claims. And the claims made are so absurd that they could easily, effortlessly be debunked. But there is no effort made by that. So the mainstream media are very much part of this ridiculous narrative of structural racism being everywhere, as indeed is academia. You know, the academia, media, the government, the globalist controlled organs of institutional power, all directed to this absurd view that structural racism and institutional racism is everywhere. And every now and again you do come across, and it's rare, you do come across interviews where the interviewer, or it may be on, say, some sort of a talk show or something like that, where somebody will question it. So, well, when you say, institutional racism, what are some clear examples of that? Can you tell me one that right now you're suffering from? And I'm thinking of one that I just saw recently where it's a rather urbane, well-spoken, very sharply dressed, a black guy. Just as the camera panned over, and his cufflinks would be worth a fair bit. So this is he's got the gold watch and all, the Rolex and everything. This guy's definitely not in the bones of his ass. So what racism he's suffering is would be interesting. He'd have to be in the richest few percent of the population to be dressed like that. But anyway, he claimed that structural racism was everywhere, and when he was challenged on it, you could see the shock on his face. Wow, hey, people don't ask me to prove it or justify it; they just accept it. I can make any claim I want, and it'll just be accepted. So clearly, he's a propagandist, a well-paid one at that. So he goes, "Oh well, my great grandparents were threatened once by the Ku Klux Klan." Okay, well that was when? That was, 1895? I mean, can you prove that? Oh, I don't have to. If my grandmother said it, then it must be true. Okay, so that's an assertion, but there's no evidence to back it up. Now, in the place where his family came from, the Ku Klux Klan was not active at all, and being up in the Northeast. So I don't really accept that possibility. Then he claims that his father was involved in some riots somewhere else and was beaten and shot at by the police. The bullwhips came out. that also sounds hollow. I don't believe that, given, again, where his family was at the time and where those so-called riots were at the time. So it's very unlikely. Won't rule it out as 100% impossible, but we'd say it's maybe 1% possible, 2% possible, very unlikely. So he's trying to claim, everybody wants to be on the balcony that Martin Luther King was assassinated on. The cred that gives them, and everybody wants to be there. There might only have been 10 people on the balcony or something like that, but there are millions claiming to be. So this idea of, my relatives were there, it's okay, well, were you there? You weren't even born at the time. So what's that got to do with structural racism, assuming it even exists today, when you're claiming, your grandfather and your great-grandfather, what's that got to do with you? So if you're going to go back over 100 years, and then the guy trots out slavery and saying that his relatives way back were brought from West Africa to North America, and he suffers today because it's, well, no, you don't. That's nonsense. And the chances are the greater likelihood, above all other likelihoods, is that your relatives were actually enslaved by other black people, then sold to Arab slave traders, who in turn sold the slaves to the slavers operating on the west coast of Africa, those ports there. That's the likelihood there. So before white people appeared on the scene, there were two transactions of other, the blacks enslaving you and then Arabs enslaving the relatives, and so this has got nothing to do with that. Again, that was hundreds of years ago. So we come to the guy gets sort of knocked off his perch a bit there. He doesn't really know what to do. He struggles with it, as others do, by the way, when they are confronted with real questions. They've got a narrative, but the narrative is built around they can make any ridiculous assertion and have it accepted without question. And when they're in an environment where that doesn't happen, they quite clearly flounder. So it goes to the next step where he said, well, it's, structural racism is today. Okay, well, all right, let's look at those examples. And he cites I think it was his mother lives in a food desert. Now that sounds pretty heavy, a food desert. What does that even mean? Does that mean she lives in the middle of a desert and there's no food? Is that what it means? No, it doesn't mean that. Does it mean she can't get food under any circumstances? She's dying of starvation as we speak? No, it doesn't mean that. Does it mean she's unable to access food at all and has to, scrounge in the dust for scraps? No, it doesn't mean that either. Does it mean that she's actually going hungry at the moment? No, it doesn't mean that. Well, what is a food desert then? So a food desert, which proves, by the way, that she is a victim of structural racism. The food desert is that she has to travel a mile, wait for this, a mile to get good quality fresh fruit and vegetables. Now, she can go to the corner store, but he says, well, the fruits and vegetables, they're kind of not fresh there. They don't get daily deliveries. They get deliveries every second day of fruit and vegetables at this shop, which is around the corner. It's like maybe 150 yards from his mother's house, but that's not the same. It's not a fully equipped mega store, grocery store, supermarket with many thousands of square feet of fresh produce and groceries and everything else. Only that, the highest level of retail outlet, that has to be within close walking distance of his mother's place. And if she doesn't have that, then she's living in a food desert, which proves that she is the victim of racism. Well, hold on a minute. Stop. She can order, anything she wants online, and they'll deliver it to her house. That doesn't matter. No, because she lives in a information technology desert, which means that she's like double our president. No, wait. There's 100% internet coverage there. Does she have an iPhone or something? Well, she don't. Well, she could order her groceries online and have it delivered. Just a mile away, it means that she lives in a food desert. You're kidding. I mean, that's not. So they can make these ridiculous claims. Now, on the other side, does that mean every white person lives within a mile of a grocery mega store? Well, of course not. So do they live in a food zone? No. It only applies if it's a black person. And this guy, like a pharmaceuticals desert, there's not a pharmacy dispensing drugs again within a mile. Now, how just that 1 mile can represent food desert or pharmaceutical or medical prescription desert is quite beyond me. But anyway, so these are the sort of claims. Now, the another claim that was made was, well, the school that in the black area needs, so he claims, needs more maintenance work done to it. I don't know what he means by maintenance. Does it mean like the roof is leaking or something? I don't know. He didn't explain that, nor could he, by the way, when he was asked. He said the school needs more maintenance work, but there's schools in rich white areas, not the school in the poor white area, but schools in the rich white area don't need as much maintenance work because more money allegedly is spent on them for maintenance than in the black area. But is that structural racism? That school in a rich area has more money than a school in a poor area. Well, duh. So there should be special taxations and dispensations and allowances made for those differences in wealth. And if that's not done, then it's structural racism and oppression and institutional racism and so on. Now, the guy went on with things like that. I thought floundering. He didn't come up with not a single reasonable or plausible thing. He could argue that outcomes were different, but even in the case where, say, the food desert thing, that assumes that every white person in the whole United States lives within one mile of a grocery megastore, which is patently absurd to make that claim. Of course they don't. Now, he came up with other things. He tried to recover himself. The guy sounded like he had an IQ above 100, but he still couldn't just start. All he could do was vomit out talking points. But then he came to one where, so white people don't all live within a mile of a grocery megastore, but because white people are all rich, they can take their top of the range Merc and drive there. No, not all white people are rich or have a top of the range Merc. That's absurd. So he couldn't come up with a single plausible fact or assertion that institutional racism exists. He could point out that outcomes were not the same, but when it came to proving that they were examples, so not as many black kids go to get PhDs or something like that sort of difference in outcome. He could claim that there are lots of poor white kids that don't have that either. Why? How is that uniquely a black issue or a racist issue? Now, most of the things he raised were really class issues. Just poor people don't have access to as many things as rich people do. We already know that. So it's a class issue, if anything. But he couldn't point to a single thing, not one thing, that suggested or made clear or proved that it was a race issue. So that just shows he was a race gender hustler. Now, if that guy or other race hustlers and grifters were questioned along those lines, every time they appeared, this whole idea of institutional racism would disappear overnight. But we've got an academia and a globalist controlled media who are heavily invested in pushing this, and they've got a lot of propagandists out there all over the place pushing it. And if you're just looking at say an interview on a media outlet, if the interviewer just nods along with it, then as just a basic consumer, you would assume that meant, well, it must be true. It must be something we're all generally agreed on this because it must be true. Otherwise, the interviewer would ask. But instead, the interviewer doesn't ask, and it just goes straight through as being a supposed fact. And this is how facts from narratives are invented. It's not a fact. It's just a narrative, and a made-up one at that. And this is how it goes through. But it was interesting to see that when these people are questioned, they fall to pieces straight away and make the most absurd claims. Imagine claiming that you're the victim of racism because you don't live within a mile of a grocery megastore. I mean, fuck me. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.